Hey Ben, earlier you were talking a lot about the Second Amendment, and my question is, oftentimes I'll hear the argument that the Second Amendment protects the First Amendment. So my question is, why does that seem to not hold true when you look at other countries? For example, if you look at Japan has almost no guns, but they have a protection for freedom of expression. But for example, if you look at Iraq and in Thailand, they actually have more guns per capita in Thailand and Iraq. Iraq is the sixth highest gun ownership rate in the world, and in Thailand, you see, specifically in the Constitution, you are not allowed to criticize the king. So my question is, why does it seem like you look at these countries like Japan, they don't have any guns, but they have much better freedom of expression. So how does that argument make any sense?
So the argument is basically that a country is built on a specific culture of that country. So I'm not saying that every argument for the Second Amendment in the United States is equally applicable everywhere. Although I will say that the Second Amendment is designed to prevent against ultimate government tyranny, and that is, I think, a fairly universal argument. And the fact that people have not used their guns to protect against government tyranny in some of the places that you're mentioning, that's not the fault of the guns, that's the fault of the people. The bottom line is that one of the reasons that you see the government fearful of violating certain rights is because there is high level of gun ownership in certain areas of America. For example, the reason that the right to bear arms remains pretty solid in the United States is because if the federal government ever contemplated going into Texas and taking away all the guns, things would get really bad really quickly, and the federal government knows that.
What's up, guys? I'm here at Politicon 2018. I'm here to interview some people. Let's go see what people have to say. What would you say within Turning Point are like the top priorities you see like in terms of policies?
Well, primarily we want to focus on some of the topics like free markets, limited government, alongside free speech. We notice a lot of people on and off campus who want to get rid of our freedom of speech, and doing so, they want to present the notion that it's like, okay, something offends me, we shouldn't say it. We generally acknowledge that, but we don't like it when people want to pass legislation on it and start policing our thoughts and stuff like that. So that's one of my big proponents at the Turning Point chapter at Cal State Long Beach.
You said they were like trying to make policies that people shouldn't be able to say certain things, or
yes.
like what was? Oh,
yeah. So primarily, it's a stem from political correctness. When they're generally talking about hate speech and stuff like that, well, they want to pass legislation against hate speech.
Right. Because I know there was something recently. I think in Canada, they were trying to say that you had to use the right pronoun or something when you're talking about to a transgender.
Yes.
Like.
Yeah. So generally, they want people to say whatever other people want to say, and it basically prevents other people from having a cohesive argument against something, and it just completely gets rid of civil discourse, and that's what we're all about: civil discourse and free speech, whether we agree with it or not.
Where do you think that comes from? Like, why do you think people are so focused on like things like that, like what they were talking about in Canada, like trying to keep transgenders, or trying to keep people from like calling them the wrong pronoun? Like, where do you think it like originates? Like, why do they do that?
Well, it stems from political correctness. The culture that we're creating right now is from the left, a lot of it, as we see. So we don't want people to be offended. So instead of trying to teach people right from wrong, they want to shield them from being offended. So that's why we have legislation that's trying to pass, trying to prevent that.
Yeah, and then also I was going to bring up like kind of going in the same category with like with transgenders. I think recently, I don't know if you know the ICD-11, but it's basically like the manual for classification of diseases, and they were basically they changed the classification for transgender. Like they're making it so it's basically no longer like an illness. Now they're changing it to, I guess it's like a sexual health dysfunction or something like that.
Okay.
Like what do you think about those people who think that it's a mental illness? Like, would you say you agree with that, or do you think it's
me personally?
Yeah.
Because I don't plan on speaking on behalf of all the Turning Point. Some people may have different opinions.
Yeah.
I personally think it is a mental illness. It was originally gender identity disorder. Now it is gender dysphoria.
Yeah.
They're trying to change that and say it's not a mental illness, but they're also saying that playing too many video games is a mental illness, so it's kind of weird.
Yeah, I mean, I guess some of the argument I usually hear is that with gender dysphoria, because they say it's if you're having, the actual definition they wrote was like if you're having clinically significant distress,
yeah,
like if you're having so much distress about it, like you have to go to the hospital or something like that. But like, do you think it makes sense to diagnose people with psychiatric illness, maybe if they're not necessarily having that kind of distress, like maybe they're transgender but they're still in society doing their job and everything? Yeah. Do you think we should try to stay away from diagnosing those people with mental illness?
I definitely think that if you classify yourself as a transgender person, we should let the statistics reflect them on it. Suicide rates are upwards of 40% within the trans community. So yeah, if we were to look at that, I definitely think that we should change something about the trans community, or actually take more notice to what we're going to do. So whether that be give them mental illness treatment, or propose different legislation against them or for them, we should definitely cater to some needs that they need.
Yeah, I hear that pretty often about that 40% number, about the higher suicide rate. But I guess from my own thinking, is the only thing when you have a population, a group with a somewhat higher suicide rate, it seems like you're kind of almost getting on a slippery slope. At what percent are you going to say, okay, well now 100% of the every single person has mental illness. But do you think that necessarily means that even if it's a higher rate, that maybe not every single individual necessarily has mental illness?
Yeah, I understand that, but I do think that we should, take notice to who they are, and maybe we should get them checked out. I'm not going to go automatically say, since you identify yourself as a trans person, that you automatically go to the hospital by any means, But I do think that we should give them more notice, or take more notice to them. Take everything case by case. That's with everything that I propose.
My question is, earlier you guys were talking about being against California gun laws. One of the laws in California, for example, is they don't allow convicted stalkers to be able to purchase handguns or other firearms. So I'm just curious, are you against all California gun laws?
They also don't allow women that have been stalked by men and violently hurt by them to get a CCW.
Right, so my question was, are you against California laws in terms of misdemeanors? For example, would you be against the idea of blocking people who have gotten DUI or petty theft, reckless driving? Do you think those people who get convicted of those misdemeanors, should they still be entitled to access handguns?
I think if you've ever purchased a handgun, you understand that you go through a little bit of a process. So you should try and go buy one.
Yeah, I'll give you an example. In LA City, the law, this is how ludicrous it is. I'm a huge supporter of the Second Amendment. And in LA City, you have to have your gun either in a secured, locked safe, or with a gun lock, or you have to have the ammunition in a completely different section of the house. Explain to me how that's going to help protect me when I really need my gun. They said, it keeps it out of the hands of kids. It's my job as a responsible gun owner to keep it out of the hands of kids, okay? And I'm liable, by the way, if somebody takes my gun and hurts somebody else with it. So
you're liable if when you are not home, someone breaks into your house, breaks into your safe, steals your Glock, and then commits a crime with it.
What? And here's the reality. The reality is, in California and LA City, their end goal is not common sense gun laws. Their end goal is to take our guns. And that's what it's about.
Stalin did it, Mussolini did it, Hitler.
But should convicted stalkers still be able to purchase handguns, in your opinion?
Convicted
stalkers, if you get convicted of misdemeanor stalking, should you still be able to purchase a handgun, in your opinion?
You can go to the street and get a handgun.
Yeah.
How are you going to legislate that?
He's not going to buy it legally if he really wants it.
But you don't think some people do go on to buy handguns that have convicted for those misdemeanors and go on?
Here's what I can tell you. With that logic, you're going to add more and more gun laws, which restrict all of our rights and our ability.
Most of the laws that they're fighting right now are already in place for the past 50 years.
Asking a very specific question is that should stalkers be allowed to have a firearm? So
That's already, if it's a misdemeanor or a felony, then they cannot do that.
That's already in place.
It's already on the
I
book.
think you're asking whether we agree with that, and I personally, the way I look at whether I support the specific legislation for guns is, does it aim to keep guns out of the hands of wrong people or out of the hands of everybody, right? And there's a very difference in legislation there. I don't think convicted felons should be able to purchase firearms, and I think even the NRA goes so far as saying hey, let's do background checks and things like that. So I think it's if we talk about common sense gun reforms, the fact that criminals can't legally buy, but they're going to get them anyway. But
because they follow the law already.
Right? Yeah, exactly. It's already the law. I don't see Republicans fighting back against those sorts of gun laws.
I love Politicon because you get to see a lot of conservatives and liberals in the same room not wanting to club each other to death.
Oh, of course.
And I have a tremendous amount of respect for that.
Yeah. I saw recently, I think you talked to Eric Swalwell, Congressman.
I did.
And I was just curious, because I talked to him too, because he's Congressman, he's like almost in my district, like right next to
It's like what, the Bay Area?
He covers like Hayward and like Fremont.
It's District 5.
No, not 5. I think it's 13, but I'm not completely sure. It should be 13.
I definitely tweeted out that it was 5. So yikes.
Well, I could be wrong on that, but I was
Fake
just
news.
curious. So I'm just curious, like, what were you guys talking about, and like.
It was really an introduction. We talked a lot about the importance of voting and all the voter drive stuff. We talked about gun control advocacy and different laws that could be passed. I mean, California is obviously a very different state with gun control. California has some pretty interesting gun laws. But I really just wanted to thank Swalwell because I have a tremendous amount of respect for him. Swalwell debates, and that's what I think is cool. Swalwell is on Fox News. He's on Tucker all the time.
That's what I was going to talk to you about.
Yeah, I think, I care more about what you say than where you say it.
Yeah.
And, I have a friend who was like, Swalwell's on Fox News. Like, what a jackass. How could he be on Fox News? I'm like, listen to what he says.
No.
He's advocating for things I agree with, and I don't care where you do it. And I respect anybody who's willing to debate on both sides.
He's like one of the few people I feel like that'll come out and actually say, like, he wrote an op-ed for, I think, U.S. News Today, and he was talking about, like being against the Second Amendment. I think he mentioned that in his article, and he was talking about an assault rifle ban. The thing I was kind of curious, because this was the point that, like, Tucker Carlson was trying to bring up. He was talking about trying to say that, like, it would be like bad, I guess, because he was trying to say there's like a discrepancy that like if you banned assault rifles, then like security guards protecting like Eric Swalwell would have assault rifles, but then like like you and I wouldn't be able to buy them. Do you think there's like what do you think about Tucker Carlson's point about that?
I think Tucker Carlson is a staunch defender of some conservative values in some great ways and in some rough ways. I think that the whole armed security versus arming citizens debate is one that I would stay away from if I was advocating for what Tucker's advocating for, and that is because I think that the whole point of these armed security guards are they're trained officials. I would very often walk around with armed security.
Police officers, right?
People would say like, how are you walking around with armed security when you want to, when you're advocating against this stuff? Well, first of all, my armed security handguns, and I have nothing against handguns. I intend to buy one when I turn 21. I get a lot of death threats. I want to protect myself. But these are trained officials. That's the thing. So if somebody's giving Swalwell shit and saying that, how could your guards have weapons? They're guards. They've been through training. They're not somebody who could just turn 18 and buy a weapon that can knock out dozens of people in a couple minutes.
Yeah, of course. What do you think about some of the policy like in Israel? Their policy is pretty strict. Like, you have to, like, basically, it's almost the opposite because they don't see guns as a right. Because, over here, basically by default, you're allowed to have access to guns. And over here, we have, like, like a federal prohibited list of, like, okay, if,
the National Firearms Act. Sure. If that's what you're talking about. You might also be talking about background checks.
There's that list of, like, okay, if you have, like, a psychiatric illness or whatever, or if you're, like, a felon.
Here's what I'll say.
Yeah.
I'll say that...
But don't you think it should be the other way? It should be like, okay, you have to prove that you're responsible.
No, I like to avoid comparing America to other countries. America is an incredibly large, incredibly geopolitically, sociopolitically diverse place.
Of course, yeah.
Israel is not a large country. It's the same thing with the socialism debate. People, when advocating for socialism, will compare the United States to Norway and the Netherlands, which are nothing like the United States. They're practically the size of Rhode Island. So I don't like to play the comparisons game. With guns, I think that I have the right to defend myself. I also, and my personal advocacy comes from how far that extends and what defense really is. For example, with semi-automatic rifles, I am staunchly opposed to them simply because, well, not opposed to them, but opposed to them being legally purchased in the United States because I feel like those are for hunting and not for protecting yourself. I'm a protecting yourself guy. I feel like there are also, we need to help, we need to find compromise with the hunters of the United States because that's their lifestyle. And when they shoot animals, it's because they're going to eat them. It's a difficult situation. And from a policy perspective, I'm not completely sure where I am. But I'll tell you that something needs to happen. I'll tell you that red flag laws are a no-brainer.
Right. So, the part of the thing that you always hear is like, well, I have a right to self-defense and all that, but isn't that kind of like a false argument a little bit because it's like, well, yeah, you have a right to self-defense, but not with anything you want. It doesn't mean you're entitled to access a handgun,
that's the whole
right?
thing. Your right to self-defense, I vehemently agree.
But it doesn't mean
with.
like I have, like, like we have these laws, like in California, if you're convicted of stalking, be a prohibited person, but like in other states, like in Utah, even if you're like convicted of stalking, you can still buy a handgun. Isn't that crazy that you could break these laws?
I think that it's very strange. I think that anybody who's convicted of practically anything should have a much harder time buying a firearm. Hey man, I have an event I gotta go to as a player.
Yeah, thank you for doing the interview. Thank you guys for watching the video. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel, and enjoy the rest of your guys' day.